A quick message from today's sponsor, iMobi. I bet some of you have lost important data and photos that were irreplaceable, or so you thought. Phone Rescue by iMobi can retrieve data such as photos, messages, and files that you've deleted and removed from Recycle Bin on your mobile device with a simple to use Windows and Mac client. Links to download are in the video description. Huge thanks to my first ever sponsor, iMobi. Enjoy the video, everyone. Yeah, I'm doing one of these videos. Think BuzzFeed 2.0. So roughly a month ago, I picked up an iPhone 10. It cost me £60 a month with a pretty hefty 50GB data plan. And yeah, it's $1,000 phone. And then one of my best friends, Ewan, went on eBay and bid on one of these. Now this is a $10 phone. It came to $10 plus shipping, which was like £5 to £6. But the actual phone itself cost $10 and it's really surprising. So of course we all know that the $1,000 phone isn't really worth $1,000, but how different is it to a $10 budget one? Hey guys, my name is Ryan Thomas with Failtech and this is the $10 versus $1,000 phone. So where I got them from? Well, I used Mobile Phones Direct to get my iPhone, which was like a third party, then through O2. And then Ewan bought this on eBay through a bid. It is used, it's not a brand new phone, it's not perfect, and we'll get into that. Let me go through the devices head to head, and I will be doing in-depth reviews on both of these, by the way. The iPhone 10 review may come later in the year, but the Blueboo review I am working on currently on writing and testing. So that will be coming soon, more in depth on that. But comparing the two specifically in this video, I'm going to go through the cameras, the screens, the usability, the specs, and then how that translates to the user experience, and maybe why the $10 phone is one of the best phones you can get. Let's talk about feel in the hand first, because that's the first thing you really get when you get one of these phones. Now, the Blueboo is very plasticky. It is kind of creaky. It does make some noises. It does flex fairly easily. It's got plastic on pretty much everywhere. The screen is glass, which is nice, but the whole thing is fairly flimsy. And I say flimsy as opposed to made of plastic because plastic phones can be really, really solid. This one is fairly flimsy. The buttons are actually part of the back of the phone, which is removable because you can access the battery compartment and the micro SD compartment from here. And the back does come off, but the buttons, as you can probably see, and I will put B-roll in, they're part of the polycarbonate back, meaning that the buttons on the inside are very finicky. So if you have to do what I had to do, which was to reinstall a whole new operating system on this thing, it could be fairly tricky because you need to access those buttons and you probably have to replace the battery a lot. So this is something that is a concern for people who use a lot of custom software. For me, wasn't really a problem. But the one thing I really liked about this phone is that the buttons, being the volume toggle and of course the power button, they're all on the same side of the phone. They weren't on opposite sides of the phone, which a lot of people, including myself, really like because it means you're not likely to hit one when you're trying to hit the other, if that makes sense. So when you're trying to change the volume, you power the phone off, or the complete opposite. I really like they're on the same side, and I actually prefer it in this config where the volume toggle is higher than the power button. This is exactly how I like my buttons, pretty much perfect. Now for ports, you get a headphone jack on the top, which is something the £1,000 phone doesn't have, and you get micro USB because a lot of budget phones use micro USB. It's a lot cheaper to implement just because it's a lot older and there's a lot of warehouse parts you can use. So of course micro USB, but it is on the top, which is odd. It's not something you usually see in smartphones. They're usually at the bottom in the center. Now like I said, it is made of plastic, but it does feel decent in the hand. Like it's fairly ergonomic. It's got a smooth rounded back, which again can be replaced and removed. And because it's a 5-inch form factor, it sits well in pretty much everyone's hands. It does have large bezels, which is something I'll get onto a bit later. Comparing it to the $1,000 iPhone, you get a completely different feel in the hand. In some regards. This has a rounded side flat back design, which is something we usually see in more modern phones. It's fairly slippery because it's got glass on the back, which is really easy to shatter and incredibly expensive to replace, so it's more likely to get broken in that sense. It does have IP67 water and dust resistance, which is nice because you've got that peace of mind that if you drop it in a pool for like a very short amount of time, you will be able to get it. Maybe in salt water, not quite the same thing, but definitely in pools or maybe the sink or anything like that. Shouldn't really be much of a problem for the phone. It does feel more premium, but because of this, you kind of have to put a case on it, which kind of negates the fact that you have a nicer feeling phone in the hand in the first place. It's just something that annoys me because you really do have to put a case on this thing. I have an OtterBox symmetry on mine, and I really don't want to take it. I don't even like putting it in smaller cases. I'm just so scared that I'm going to break it because it's just such an expensive phone, and that's something you don't have to worry about with the Blueboo, mainly because it costs $10. I mean, that's crazy. You get lightning connectivity and no headphone jack on the iPhone, which is something that again is much better on the Blueboo in actual fact. The speaker on the back of the Blueboo is tinny and can be covered fairly easily, so that's something I don't like about it. And the iPhone does have a stereo-ish pair of speakers. It has like a bottom firing and then the earpiece doubles, so it's kind of stereo, but yeah, I feel like the speakers are a lot better on these more expensive phones, mainly because consumers have been complaining about how bad speakers are in recent smartphones, but that's something you won't get on a lot of cheap devices. Next up is battery and battery life. Now this is a very controversial thing in smartphones because we often find that just batteries aren't big enough in a lot of phones. The Blueboo shows to have 1000 milliamp hours, but it's actually a 2750 milliamp hour battery, which is something that's like weird to me. I just don't understand it. It does show up in a few different applications as 1000. Maybe I've got a dodgy battery, but because it's replaceable, you can go and get another one and swap it out, which I really like because a lot of phones will die in terms of battery life after like a year. You won't notice it because you'll be charging it so much, but then you realize that when you put a fresh battery in it, it just feels completely different. Lasts about 60% of the day with decently heavy use. Its standby time is better than I thought it would be, and the overall performance compared to battery life means that this thing, you're probably less likely to use it throughout the day like you would an iPhone because it's not quite as smooth, so it's less seamless and doesn't really make you want to get your phone out of your pocket. And for that reason alone, I reckon it could last a full day for a lot of people, but just not for me because I'm a bit of a power user. Now, the iPhone has a slightly smaller 2716 mAh battery, but with a much more power efficient system on a chip and software that allows for much better battery life. For me, I get about a day and a half to 2 days of battery life out of this thing. It's really useful because I don't tend to have chargers around, so I have to really find a charger when I need one. But it does have fast charging available if you have that certain power plug, and it does have wireless charging as well, which I was using a lot in my first couple of weeks of using this device. Again, a lot of cheap phones will use micro USB like the Blueboo, and it's just something you got to deal with. Now, the displays are a bit weird because although they are completely different, and I mean the complete opposite in terms of technique of build, technology, resolution, size, everything like that, they actually work out to be a fairly similar experience. The iPhone has a 5.8 inch, almost wide QHD, but not quite wide QHD, OLED 19:9 display. It's got rounded corners, it's got the notch, it's fairly seamless, it's fairly bezel-less. You all know what an iPhone 10 screen looks like. And it's a great screen. It's one of the best screens I've ever used on a phone because it's just so natural and neutral, and it doesn't oversaturate, but it doesn't undersaturate. Viewing angles are fairly decent. It's a good screen. It's one of the best that I've used. However, the Blueboo, on paper, really doesn't look that good. It's a 5-inch 960 by 540 IPS display at the 16:9 form factor. Now, immediately off the bat, that sounds like a really low resolution at 960 by 540, but in actual fact, it's a really good resolution for the system on the chip and for the battery, and really for the size at 5 inches. Now, this is a lot sharper of a display than I thought it was going to be when I first looked at the phone, and I really like that about this thing because it's one of those phones where, from a typical distance of holding a phone, you look at it and it actually looks like a solid display. It does look a little bit soft sometimes when you're looking at fine text and stuff, but in terms of images, social media, stuff like that, it just looks great. And because it's IPS, it has those solid viewing angles and the colors. Now, the colors are great on the Blueboo, and that's something I really want to cover in my review later on in the week, or next week rather. So you'll see that a lot of budget phones will use IPS and a lot of premium phones will use OLED, just because OLED's more expensive, but it's also more power efficient and kind of looks better in a lot of people's opinion. Again, this is kind of subjective, but I personally prefer the look of OLED. When it comes to cameras, you've got two 12 megapixel sensors on the iPhone, which I did a video on recently. It doesn't actually use dual sensors all the time. You get a telephoto lens and a main lens. It shoots UHD 60 FPS video, 1080 at 240 FPS. I mean, this thing is pretty specced out when it comes to the camera. It's one of the most featureful cameras you can get on the market. And the Blueboo is quite the opposite of that. We've got an 8 megapixel camera with 720p video recording that really doesn't look that good. No slow motion or anything, but it does have electronic image stabilization. But then when you compare it and then you compare the price, the photos don't look bad. They look passable. You could use this to list some things on the Facebook marketplace and stuff like that. It's really not that bad. Just when you're used to really high-end flagship phones, it can look a little bit dated. And there aren't any optical image stabilization or any features like that that really stand out from the phone, and that's something that a lot of people want in their smartphones. But for $10, crikey. Front cameras on these phones are a completely different story. The Blueboo, I would say, has an unusable front camera. It just looks absolutely awful. And the iPhone X's front camera, whilst not the best on the market, is fairly good in decent light. Now, the reason I'm hitting the Blueboo so hard on especially the selfie camera is because a lot of people these days are taking selfies. Now, the sort of person that would spend $10 on a smartphone may not take a lot of selfies, but because it's just such a popular thing in the smartphone industry these days, I thought I'd give it a bit of a hard time for that. Now, there are a few things about the Blueboo that I haven't touched upon yet that I really like. Firstly is that although this thing is running 5.1 Android, it's running a very, very stock version of it. There isn't a skin or a huge difference in terms of the software support. It's just 5.1 stock Android, and there aren't really any ROMs that you can use that really support the new operating systems. But at the end of the day, like, again, it's a $10 phone. It does have a quad-core MediaTek CPU with 1GB of RAM, 8GB of storage. Now, this can be a bit laggy, but again, for social media usage and for checking emails and for doing the basic things that you would do on a $10 smartphone, it's not bad. It can play a few games as well if you really want to, although the battery life will degrade fairly significantly because of this. Consuming content and watching video off YouTube is, again, just an absolute breeze on this thing, even at $10. Now, the iPhone X is known to be one of the most powerful smartphones you can get, with a 6-core CPU, 3GB of RAM, 64 or 256GB of storage. The thing is spec'd out. And it's very smooth, and to me, I've never had any crashes, especially on iOS 11 point whatever we're on now. Compared to the Blueboo, this is one of the biggest changes, but again, it's not 100 times better, which is what 10 times 100 gives you 1,000. It's not that much better than the Blueboo. It's very good, it's the pinnacle, but this is getting there. It's pretty close. Now, in terms of the extras that you get on this thing, you get a standard SIM slot and a micro SIM slot as opposed to the single nano SIM slot that you get on the iPhone. You also get micro SD expansion, which is really nice compared to literally no external or expandable storage on the iPhone whatsoever ever since it came out, which is really nice to have on a phone of this size because yes, it only has 8GB of internal storage, but if you really want to use it for a music player or to watch movies and stuff, you can just put a micro SD card in here and away you go, basically. It does come with a small film screen protector pre-installed, which is another bonus, which is lovely. And it comes in a pretty good box, like it comes with a few accessories. Like, the thing doesn't come that badly for the price. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of documentation about this phone online, meaning that there aren't really any ROMs that you could download apart from, I believe, 5.1 Resurrection Remix. But that's pretty much it. And that means that support when this thing does go wrong may be a problem. But in my eyes, this isn't a problem just because it's $10, or if you buy it, maybe $20, depending on how much you pay for shipping, where you are in the world, and your local currency. And for that reason alone, I think this is one of the best smartphones you can buy today. This was not brand new, this was used, and so prices may vary, but I've shown this to my friends Callum, Ewan who bought it obviously, my mum, my girlfriend, pretty much everyone I've spoken to in the last week, I've shown them this phone, and they were absolutely astonished that this thing cost $10, even if it cost an extra £5 to £6 for postage. Just the actual phone costing this much is ridiculous. The first bit of feedback I got was the screen was really good for the price. The second bit of feedback that I got was that it's fairly slim. Like, okay, it's got the pretty large bezels, on-screen buttons, stuff like that, but really, it looks fairly 2016-y of a phone, and even 2016 phones can cost a heck of a lot of money these days. So general consensus is that if you can get smartphones like this in 2018 for $10 to $20, that is a huge leap. So for $10, which is, again, not a lot of money at all, this thing has more RAM and more processing power than my first computer, and that thing cost hundreds of pounds to buy, and that was maybe 15 or 20 years ago. This is ridiculous. This is crazy. This is just, I'm absolutely flabbergasted. When I first got this and opened up the package, I was amazed at just how crazy this thing was. And that's pretty much it. You get a lot for your money. This phone, which costs $1,000, and this phone cost $10, this is not worth 100 of these. Absolutely not. That's been it from me, guys. I'm really sorry that I rambled a bit, but I really did want to go over this phone because it's awesome. There will be a review coming in the future. I hope you've really enjoyed this video. Please do like, dislike, comment, subscribe if you're new around here to never miss a video like this one. I want to thank my patrons. You guys are absolutely amazing. I love you so much. Please do follow my social medias and my Discord because they're really awesome places to be. My name's been Ryan Thomas for Failtech, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.